Shavua Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Sukkah. We are up to Perek Dal Mishnah Het. Today's Mishnayot should be Leilu Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Aranbayev, and Neriyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Menuchatam beGan Eden, Amen, and Lavdil ben Chaim L'Chaim, for the Refuah Shenema Bacha Bat Esther, and Daniel Shem ben Rosa, Betoch Shach Cholei Israel. The Tana returns to explaining the first Mishnah of this chapter. The Mishnah begins, Ha'alel v'Simcha Shmona. The Mishnah stated the mitzvot of reciting Halil and rejoicing apply for 8 days. Ketzad, how is this to be understood? Milamed shechayav adam ba'alel u'vasimcha u'bichvod yom tov ha'acharon shel chag kishar kol yemot chag. It teaches that a man is obligated in the mitzvot of Halil, rejoicing and honoring on the last Yom Tov of the festival Shmini Atzeret, just as he is obligated on all the other days of the festival, the 7 days of Sukkot. Now, honoring includes, among other things, making preparations that honor the day, washing oneself, tidying up the house, setting the table, and wearing clean clothing. Now the commentaries explain because every day of Sukkot has a unique Musaf offering, the entire Halel is recited on each day. Shmini Atzeret certainly requires its own recitation of Halel, since it is an independent Yom Tov in many respects. It is derived from the Torah that the obligation to rejoice on Yom Tov applies not only on the 7 days of Sukkot, but also on Shmini Atzeret. Sukkah Shiva, the Mishnah stated the mitzvah of Sukkah applies for 7 days. Ketzad, how is this to be understood? Meaning, what is the Mishnah teaching here? Gamar mile'echol lo yatir sukkato. It teaches that when one has finished eating his last meal on the 7th day of Sukkot, he should not untie the binding of his Sukkah to take it apart, because the mitzvah of Sukkah remains in force the entire day, obligating him, if he studies or naps or eats another meal, to do so in the Sukkah. Aval murid et hakelim min hamincha ulmala. However, from the time of Mincha and so on. Now, Mincha in this context refers to 2.5 hours before sunset. The Ritba explains Mincha Ktana. He may bring down into his house the fine utensils and bedding that he used in the Sukkah. Now, in those days, people often built their Sukkahs on their roofs. And the Mishnah says, Mipnei chivod Yom Tov ha'acharon shel chag, because he thereby gives honor to the last Yom Tov of the festival Shmini Atzeret by preparing for its evening meal in advance. That is the end of Mishnah Chet. Mishnah Tet now describes the mitzvah of pouring water, Nisuch HaMayim, that was performed each morning of the 7 days of Sukkot. Now, every day of the year, wine was poured onto the altar when the Tamid was offered. On each morning of Sukkot, water was poured onto the altar at the same time as the wine. This mitzvah, which is called Nisuch HaMayim, pouring the water, was taught orally to Moshe at Har Sinai, but there are hints to it in the written Torah. The Mishnah begins, Nisuch HaMayim Ketzad. How was the mitzvah of pouring the water done? Salochit shel zahav mahazeket shloshet lugim haya memale min hashiluach. A Kohen filled a golden jug that could hold 3 lugin with water from the spring of Shiloach, which was near Yerushalayim. It was then brought to the temple in a procession. Higiu l'shar hamayim taku ve'iriu v'taku. When they reached the water gate in the southern wall of the temple courtyard. Now the water gate was the entrance to the courtyard closest to the ramp of the altar. It was given this name because of the very ceremony described here, carrying the water into the courtyard for the mitzvah of the Nisuch HaMayim. The Mishnah says when they would reach the water gate, they blew on their trumpets a tkiyah, 1 long note, a teruah, 3 short notes, and another tkiyah, another long note, as an expression of joy, because it is stated in Sefer Yeshaya, chapter 12, pasuk 3, Ush'avtem mayim bisason, you shall draw water in joy. Alayev kevesh, a Kohen went up the ramp of the altar carrying the jug of water. Ufanal ismolo, and when he reached the top, he turned to his left and walked to the southwestern corner of the altar. Shnei sfalim shel kesef hayusham, 2 silver bowls were there, one in which a Kohen poured the wine of the daily Tamid service, and one in which another Kohen poured the water on each day of Sukkot. The diagram is brought down in the Arts Co-elucidated note 4. Now, the previous Tana said that the bowls were silver, but the next Tana disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Shel sidayu. Actually, the bowls were made of plaster, which is white. Ela sheyu mushcharin peneim mipnei hayayin. But they had a silverly, a gray appearance because their surfaces has been darkened from the wine poured into them. Even the bowl used for the water looks silvery because wine was sometimes poured into that bowl by mistake. Now the Mishnah describes the bowls further. umnukavin kimin shnei chotamin dakin. They had holes like two thin nostrils, meaning each bowl had a spout at its base in which there was a hole, giving the appearance of a nostril. Echad me'ubeh ve'echad dak. The nostril of one bowl, the one used for the wine, was wide, to hasten the flow of the thick wine, and the nostril of the other one, the one used for water, was narrow. Kadesh shneim kalin bevatachat, so that both of them, the water and the wine, would finish flowing out of the bowls at the same time. The wine of those times was very thick and flowed slower than water. Therefore, in order to have both liquids finish flowing out of their bowls at the same time, the nostril of the wine bowl was made wider than the nostril of the water bowl. The water and the wine flowed from the nostrils onto the top of the altar, and from there they drained into a hole in the top of the altar that led to deep hollows beneath the altar, as the Rav explains. Now the two bowls were side by side, one to the west and one to the east. Both bowls were located next to the horn on the southwestern corner of the altar. This again is brought down a diagram, must be elucidated, note 7. The Mishnah identifies which bowl was used for which libation. Ma'aravi shel mayim, mizrachi shel yain. The western bowl was for the water and the eastern bowl was for the wine. Eras shel mayim letoch shel yain, v'shel yain letoch shel mayim yetzad. Nevertheless, if one poured from the jug of water into the bowl for the wine, or from the jug of the wine into the bowl for the water, he has fulfilled his obligation. Now this Mishnah stated above that the required amount of water was 3 lugin. The first Mishnah of this chapter taught that it was poured on 7 days, the 7 days of Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret. The next Tana disagrees with both points. Rabbi Yehuda says, Balo gaya menasech kol shmona. The Kohen would pour from a jug containing 1 log on all 8 days, including Shmini Atzeret. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the law received at Har Sinai stated that just 1 log of water was enough. He also holds that just as the mitzvah of rejoicing applies on all 8 days, so does the mitzvah of pouring the water, which is celebrated with joy, as taught in the next chapter. And the Rav does tell us, Ven lechak Rabbi Yehuda, the lecha does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Now, before the Kohen poured the water, he was given an instruction. They would say to the one who pours the water, Hagbah yadecha, raise your hand when you pour. He was told to raise his hand because it once happened that one Kohen who rejected the oral law deliberately poured the water onto his feet instead of into the bowl. This Kohen belonged to the cult of the Tzidukim, who accepted only the written law and rejected the oral law. They were therefore opposed to the mitzvah of pouring the water, which was taught orally to Moshe at Sinai and is not mentioned explicitly in the Torah. And all the people pelted him with their etrogim. From then on, they asked the Kohen to lift his hand when pouring so that they could see whether he was pouring it into the bowl. And that is in Abotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Everybody should have a Shavua Tov. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.